Well, joining me now for more insight into the tragedy is Damon Dozier, and he's a social justice minister for a Washington, D.C. church. He also has a background in anthropology and served as the director of public affairs for the American Anthropological Association. Damon, welcome to the broadcast.
Thank you for having me here.
So, have you had a chance to look at Dylann Roof's manifesto, The Alleged Killer, and what do you make of it?
Well, I've seen some portions of the manifesto. I haven't had a chance to examine it in detail. But what I do think about it is that it's the sign of not only a troubled young man, but reflective of a history of racism and easy access to sort of racist thoughts and racist ideology. I think it's a tragedy all the way around. I think one of the things that hasn't been spoken about is the role of faith, especially with the families who lost mothers, who lost fathers, who lost children, and the way that they talked about forgiveness and talked about moving forward. I think that that's something that's really important and really strong, and a really strong statement for faith in this country.
He writes a lot about Trayvon Martin, a highly publicized case here in the U.S. where a young black teen was shot by a man by the name of George Zimmerman, a neighborhood watch authority in the neighborhood. He says that this sort of sparked him to think about racism. Do crimes like this breed other crimes? Is it a copycat situation? You
know, that's an interesting question, and I think it's very complicated to answer. I think racism is multi-sectoral. I think it comes from a number of different things. We don't know what this young man was exposed to, whether he was exposed to a hate group or whether he was exposed to things when he was younger or anything else about his background. Those details are still emerging. I do think, however, that the Trayvon Martin shooting was a flashpoint, not only for individuals who espouse hate, but also for those individuals who find hate as repugnant, as I think many of us do.
It's interesting, in the U.S., obviously, so much attention is spent and money is spent on terrorism overseas. What about racism here in the U.S. and putting money towards education? And we've had so much talk, especially recently, about the killing of killing by black officers on unarmed white men. What do you make of that? Do you think more money needs to be spent?
I think a government spending reflects its priorities. And I think spending money on overseas terrorism has definitely been a priority for not only this administration, but for previous administrations. But I think you bring up a good point, which is that domestic terrorism does happen. This isn't simply just the actions of a young man who is troubled. This is a domestic terrorism act. And I think more money needs to be spent on domestic terrorism and sort of challenging domestic terrorism. And when you look at some of the groups that the young man aligned himself with, for example, Rhodesia in Africa and some of the other apartheid regimes, I think more money needs to go into education and to sort of preventing this type of belief system to be thrown out there. So I agree. I think money needs to be spent. I think that resources need to be devoted to taking a really hard look at what our young people are looking at and what they're believing.
There has been a lot of dialogue in this country about I correct myself, I should say the shootings of unarmed black men by white police officers is what I meant to say. And it certainly sparked a great debate, but you hear about stories like this, and it seems like we've taken 10 steps back, and the whole world is watching.
Well, racism is an institution and it's a structure. And when you think about it, the path for civil rights in this country is actually a short path when you think of the long history of the nation. So the nation has been around for 250 years, something around that. But we've only started talking about civil rights really since 64, 65. And so I think that the country is still dealing with issues of racism, sexism, rights for all different types of individuals, not just black or Asian or Hispanic American or some of these other groups. And so I think it takes some time. I think racism is multi-generational. I think institutions are hard to change overnight.
Damon Dozier, thank you so much. We appreciate your time.